What if a desperate waitress, surviving on tips in an elegant restaurant, whispers 3 words in Russian to the wrong person at the right time? When Natalia recognizes the wife of billionaire CEO Marcus Reynolds, she makes a split-second choice that will cost her job but expose a $2 billion fraud scheme that fooled the entire financial world. The elite couple never imagined their 5-star dinner would turn into the night their empire crumbled, all because of a struggling immigrant who had nothing to lose but her silence. The crystal chandeliers of Le Ciel restaurant fractured light across gleaming silverware as Natalia Petrova balanced 5 plates along her forearm, a skill perfected through 3 years of servitude in this temple to excess and indulgence. Her calloused fingers, raw from hourly submersions in scalding dishwater and industrial cleaning solutions, moved with balletic precision around tables where single bottles of wine cost more than her monthly rent. Behind her eyes, calculating constantly, lay the heaviness of responsibility for a mother 6,000 miles away in St. Petersburg, whose cancer medications consumed 80% of every paycheck Natalia managed to send. The patrons who occupied the 28 tables of Le Ciel never truly saw her face, their gaze sliding past as if she were merely another decorative element alongside the gold-leaf ceiling, motifs and imported marble columns. In her uniform, pressed to perfection each night with an iron she shared with 3 other apartment dwellers, she moved like a ghost through conversations about vacation homes and investment portfolios, collecting snippets of a world built on foundations of wealth she could scarcely imagine. Her studio apartment, 9 floors up with unreliable elevator service, contained exactly 400 square feet of survival space with a mattress on the floor and a hot plate that sparked dangerously when overused. The bathroom ceiling leaked during heavy rains, forming a constellation of brown water stains that Natalia had named after Russian poets during sleepless nights. Manager Claude Beaumont stood at the service station, tapping his Italian leather shoe against polished floor tiles, while scrutinizing her every movement through narrowed eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. His voice, when addressing her, always carried the thin edge of contempt reserved for those he considered beneath his station. Yet between the chaos of dinner service and the weight of exhaustion that followed her home each night, Natalia maintained a straight spine and clear gaze that refused to bend toward bitterness. Her small personal rebellions lived in perfect service in remembering that Mr. Donovan, at table 7, preferred his water without ice, in silently correcting mispronounced Russian dishes without embarrassing the speaker, in helping younger servers avoid Claude's wrath through whispered warnings and diverted attention. The envelope she prepared each week for her mother always contained a cheerful note describing imaginary adventures in America rather than the reality of double shifts and missed meals. The grace with which she carried herself through humiliation and hardship remained her private victory, invisible to the wealthy patrons who never bothered to learn her name despite her flawless memory of their preferences and allergies. When the kitchen doors swung closed each night at 2 a.m, she would stand for just 20 seconds, shoulders finally allowed to slump, before gathering her dignity once more for the long subway ride to a neighbourhood the restaurant clientele would never visit. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favour? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like, and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The Wednesday evening calm of Le Ciel fractured the instant Marcus Reynolds stepped through its ornate doors. His 6'4" frame commanding attention, while the hostesses fluttered into practice formation like birds responding to a predator. Behind him, Katerina Reynolds followed, in Louboutin heels that clicked against marble with metronome precision, her platinum hair arranged in a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her porcelain features into a permanent expression of mild surprise. Claude transformed instantly before her eyes, his perpetual scowl dissolving into obsequious warmth as he personally escorted the couple to the best table in the restaurant, the one positioned perfectly beneath the central chandelier where everyone could observe and be observed. Natalia noticed the slight tremor in Katerina's hand as she arranged her Hermès silk scarf. How her eyes never settled on any one spot but darted continuously between exits and entrances, a familiar vigilance Natalia recognized from her own childhood in post-Soviet Russia. The woman wore her Valentino gown like armor rather than clothing, her Rubfin diamond necklace less an accessory than a collar, marking ownership and status. Marcus spread himself across his chair as though it were a throne, gesturing for his 3 waiting business associates to sit while never acknowledging the 4 staff members arranging napkins and filling water glasses around them. His voice carried across the restaurant, a practiced boom calibrated to command attention without appearing to seek it, while he launched into detailed explanations of market inefficiencies his firm had allegedly discovered. Natalia caught fragments as she served their first course, phrases about guaranteed returns and exclusive access, algorithmic certainties and insider connections, while Katerina studied the condensation on her water glass with such intensity one might believe it contained fortunes within its sliding droplets. The 4 men laughed at precisely the same moment, their expensive watches catching light with synchronized flashes, their Savile Row suits cut from identical cloths in marginally different shades of authority. Between wine pours, Natalia observed how Marcus would occasionally place his hand over Katerina's with possessive pressure rather than affection, how her spine stiffened imperceptibly each time before she manufactured a smile that never reached eyes the colour of winter skiers. The business conversation transformed seamlessly into boasts about the Reynolds' recent acquisition of a 4th home, this one in the Maldives, while something flashed across Katerina's face at the mention of international wire transfers, something cold and knowing and afraid. Claude hovered nearby, ensuring Natalia executed every service element perfectly for these $6 million clients, his eyes communicating career-ending threats should she falter in any detail. Yet something in the rigid control of this tableau stirred memories in Natalia, of powerful men in Moscow whose wealth appeared overnight during privatization, of silent wives with eyes full of unspoken truth, of systems where wealth flowed upward through channels carved by corruption and sealed with threats. Steam billowed around Natalia as she pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, her mind replaying something familiar about the woman at table 9, while Chef Antoine barked orders across the chaotic symphony of clattering pans and sizzling proteins. Standing momentarily still amid the frenzy, her hands gripping the cool metal of the prep counter, Natalia felt recognition crystallize like ice forming on glass as the image of Katerina Reynolds superimposed over a 4-month-old news segment her mother had sent her. The Russian-language broadcast had featured daughters of Volgograd who had married Western businessmen, with Katerina Sorokina, now Reynolds, positioned as a success story, though her eyes had held the same captive emptiness Natalia observed tonight. The copper pots hanging above reflected fragmented images of kitchen staff as Natalia fought against the sudden flood of memories from 12 years ago. Her father, Mikhail, sitting at their small kitchen table, head in hands, explaining how his entire pension had vanished in what American authorities later called a sophisticated cross-border investment fraud. His engineering position at the state bank had given him inside access to what seemed a legitimate opportunity, only to discover he had helped funnel money into criminal enterprises, his signature on documents he had trusted without adequate translation. 3 other bank employees had been convicted while the true architects of the scheme, wealthy men with Western connections, remained untouched by consequences. Natalia had found him in their shed 2 weeks later, his body suspended from a ceiling beam, face purpled and tongue protruding in his final protest against a system rigged to protect the powerful. The evening newspaper had still been clutched in his hand, open to an article about another banker suicide linked to the same investigation. Balancing the tray of panna cotta with berry compote, Natalia steadied her trembling hands as she returned to the Reynolds table, observing Katerina more carefully now as the woman reached for her clutch to retrieve lipstick. Her phone slipped onto the white tablecloth screen, illuminating with her background image before automatically locking. Natalia nearly dropped her tray as she registered the unmistakable onion domes of St. Nikolai Cathedral, the small church where her own parents had married, surrounded by the distinctive birch forests of southern Volgograd Oblast. The coincidence seemed too precise to be random, too specific to be meaningless. Claude appeared at her shoulder, murmuring instructions about the dessert presentation, unaware of the thundering realization building in Natalia as she carefully arranged each dish. Memories cascaded like dominoes, newspaper clippings her mother still kept, financial records with foreign company names, including Reynolds International appearing repeatedly, the same corporation whose CEO now sat before her, his hand casually possessive on his wife's shoulder as he held court. Beneath the weight of silver trays and crystal glasses, Natalia felt something shift in her understanding of why she had come to America, why she had ended up in this specific restaurant, on this specific night, serving this specific table, as if her father had orchestrated one final chance at the justice he had dialed without witnessing. The dessert plates gleamed under chandelier light as Natalia circled the table with practiced efficiency, her heart thundering against her ribs with such force she feared the guests might hear it above the gentle classical music filling the restaurant. Each movement brought her closer to Katerina Reynolds until she stood directly behind the Russian woman, close enough to catch the scent of her Clive Christian perfume mingling with something cheaper and more familiar beneath, a soap brand from Volgograd that Natalia recognized from childhood. The decision crystallized in her mind between one heartbeat and the next. 18 years of cautious survival in America against a single moment of dangerous truth that might change nothing or everything. Leaning down with the pretext of refilling a water glass, Natalia allowed 3 words to slip from her lips in perfect Russian, her voice barely above the threshold of hearing, meant for one woman only in the crowded room. The words landed like stones dropping into still water as Katerina froze mid-gesture, her complexion draining to the colour of the tablecloth while the crystal flute slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against fine china with sound that cut through ambient conversation. Marcus Reynolds paused mid-anecdote, his predatory attention shifting from business associates to his wife, whose lips had parted in silent shock while her eyes locked with the waitress standing behind her chair. His voice shifted from jovial to dangerous in a single syllable as he demanded what had been said, his hand closing around Katerina's wrist with visible pressure that whitened her skin beneath his manicured fingers. The restaurant atmosphere crystallized into uncomfortable silence radiating outward from their table as other diners sensed the disruption in social order, the unexpected drama unfolding among them. Claude materialized beside Natalia with supernatural speed, his face contorted with rage and mortification as he gripped her elbow with bruising force, apologizing profusely to Reynolds while steering her forcefully toward the kitchen. The following 15 minutes blurred together as Natalia was stripped of her server credentials, her final paycheck withheld for alleged violations of confidentiality agreements, her personal belongings thrust into her arms before security escorted her through back service corridors and out into the loading dock where delivery trucks usually idled. Rain poured from a moonless sky, soaking through her thin blouse within seconds as she stood clutching her purse and phone, suddenly jobless and soon to be homeless when rent came due in 4 days with no possibility of payment or extension from her unsympathetic landlord. Yet beneath the weight of immediate consequences, something electric pulsed through her veins, something that felt strangely like purpose after years of mere survival. The knowledge that Katerina Reynolds had recognized exactly what she meant about Volgograd, her reaction confirming connections between Marcus Reynolds and the financial scheme that had destroyed her father and dozens of Russian families like hers. The fluorescent bulb in Natalia's bathroom flickered erratically, casting sickly pulses of light across the spread of past-due notices covering her kitchen counter like fallen autumn leaves, each one stamped with increasingly urgent red warnings. 3 days had passed since her termination. 72 hours of unanswered calls to every restaurant in the 5 boroughs, each rejection building the wall between her present desperation and any possible future. Her mother's voice on their morning call had grown weaker, the hospital in St. Petersburg requiring payment before continuing treatments that kept death waiting in the hallway rather than seated at her bedside. Rain continued its relentless assault against windows sealed with duct tape against drafts, the persistent leak from upstairs tracking moisture down her wall in rivulets that pooled along the baseboard, soaking into cardboard boxes containing the few photographs and mementos she had carried from Russia. The sudden vibration of her phone against laminate countertops startled her, from calculations that consistently ended with negative numbers regardless of how she manipulated the figures. A text message from an unknown number containing an address, a time 2 hours hence, and the words about Volgograd, followed by a hotel name Natalia recognized from advertisements targeting the wealthiest 1% of Manhattan residents. The gleaming lobby of the Wellington embraced her in warmth and subtle lighting when she arrived, her second-hand coat still damp, her shoes leaving faint impressions on marble flooring that likely cost more than every possession she had ever owned combined. The security personnel who approached her wore discreet earpieces and tailored suits that failed to conceal their athletic builds and vigilant postures, escorting her with professional detachment toward private elevators requiring keycard access to the penthouse floors. Katerina Reynolds waited alone in a suite larger than 4 of Natalia's apartments combined, windows overlooking Central Park displaying the city lights like scattered diamonds across black velvet, her designer clothes exchanged for simple jeans and sweater that somehow enhanced rather than diminished her elegance. The Russian woman dismissed her security team with a gesture, speaking in rapid English to the confused men before switching to flawless Volgograd dialect Russian once the door closed behind them, explaining that these men worked for her alone, not Marcus, having been secretly hired through channels her husband could never trace. 4 hours of recorded phone calls played from Katerina's laptop demonstrated her years-long accumulation of evidence against Reynolds International, documenting systematic fraud across 16 countries, bribery of officials, environmental violations, and money laundering operations that had destroyed countless lives, including, she now understood, Natalia's father, along with dozens of other bank employees framed as scapegoats for a scheme engineered at much higher levels. Natalia stood speechless before the elaborate investigation board, Katerina revealed behind a sliding panel, photographs and documents connected by color-coded strings illustrating the architecture of corruption she had been documenting since realizing her marriage was merely a convenient acquisition of Russian banking connections through an oligarch's daughter who had once believed in American dreams. Steam rose from fine bone china teacups as Katerina poured from a silver service, her hand steady despite the weight of secrets now flowing between them like the amber liquid filling their cups. The penthouse suite windows reflected their images against the night sky beyond. 2 Russian women from the same soil, now occupying vastly different worlds through the machinations of one man. Katerina spoke of her father, once regional director of Volgograd Central Bank, and how Marcus Reynolds had systematically acquired compromising material on him through staged situations with women, doctored financial records, and fabricated political connections that would have sent him to Siberian labor camps if exposed to Putin allies in government. The photographs Marcus had shown her on their 3rd meeting contained manufactured evidence sufficient to destroy her entire family, presented with the calm assurance of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted through whatever means necessary. Their courtship had lasted precisely 6 weeks before the marriage contract was presented alongside thinly veiled reminders of what awaited her, parents should she decline his generous offer. The sweet lights dimmed automatically as evening deepened outside, casting subtle shadows across Katerina's face as she described 7 years of careful evidence gathering, recording conversations when Marcus thought her asleep, photographing documents left temporarily unguarded, cultivating sources within his organization who harbored their own resentments against a man who discarded people like empty champagne bottles once their usefulness ended. Despite her efforts, the critical link connecting Reynolds International to the Volgograd banking operation remained elusive, protected by shell corporations and proxy directors whose names appeared nowhere in official records. The same operation that had somehow intersected with Natalia's life in ways Katerina needed desperately to understand. Natalia cradled her teacup between palms still calloused from years of carrying heavy trays, describing her father, Mikhail Petrov, his 29 years at Volgograd International Bank, his position in foreign transaction verification that gave him access to the precise accounts Marcus had used to move millions through Russia into tax havens across 6 continents. The familiar ache of loss welled in her throat as she recounted finding his body, the subsequent investigation that blamed the victims while protecting the architects of fraud, the newspaper clippings. She still kept documenting 8 similar suicides across 3 financial institutions during those dark months. Recognition dawned in Katerina's eyes as connection points aligned between her investigation and Natalia's experience, names and dates and account numbers suddenly forming a coherent picture where before had existed only fragmented suspicions. Their hands met across polished mahogany as Katerina whispered that Natalia's whispered words at Le Ciel had given her the missing link needed to finally bring irrefutable evidence to federal prosecutors, their fingers intertwining with the instinctive grip of drowning victims who suddenly spot a rescue boat on the horizon. 2 women shaped by the same destructive force, now united in purpose against the man who had stolen their futures through different forms of the same ruthless calculation that viewed human lives as mere variables in profit equations. The 74th floor of Reynolds Tower gleamed with technological supremacy, floor-to-ceiling windows transforming Manhattan into a toyscape far below where 8 million lives played out in miniature, irrelevant to the man who stood with his back to the door, tumbler of 30-year Macallan clutched in one manicured hand. Marcus Reynolds absorbed the information relayed by his private security chief with Dane's dangerous stillness, only the whitening knuckles around crystal betraying the volcanic rage building beneath his tailored Tom Ford suit as surveillance photographs of Katerina entering the Wellington, with the Waitress spread across his obsidian desk. Reflective surfaces dominated the office design, strategic mirrors positioned to ensure Reynolds could observe every angle of approach, every facial expression of those seeking audience in his rarefied atmosphere. Nothing left to chance or vulnerability in a space designed to intimidate through calculated opulence and implied power. The security chief, Jensen, former special forces with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a moral compass rendered conveniently adjustable by 6-figure compensation, stood at parade rest while delivering confirmation that his wife had indeed established independent security personnel outside his approved channels, suggesting preparations long in motion rather than recent improvisation. Financial markets continued their electronic dance across wall-mounted screens showing global exchanges, numbers shifting in real time while Reynolds processed this betrayal with the cold calculation that had built his $11 billion empire from leveraged positions and regulatory blind spots across 4 continents. His voice emerged controlled and precise as polished steel as he initiated Protocol Scimitar, the prearranged contingency developed 5 years earlier for exactly this scenario. Instructing his chief financial officer via secure line to accelerate transfers through Singapore and Dubai into final destinations across the Cayman banking network, liquidating positions worth billions before federal investigators could freeze assets. The panoramic view caught late afternoon sunlight that transformed glass towers into burning gold monoliths, while Reynolds scrolled through his secure tablet, accessing prenuptial provisions hidden within subparagraphs that would render Katerina penniless upon dissolution of marriage under specific conditions, including conspiracy clauses his legal team had crafted precisely to protect against spousal betrayal. The elegant office with its minimalist sculptures and original Rothko concealed reinforced walls, bulletproof glass, and multiple escape routes befitting someone who had accumulated enemies proportional to his wealth, who understood that power attracted both sycophants and assassins in equal measure. The temperature remained precisely 68 degrees regardless of season or occupancy, yet sweat beaded along Jensen's hairline as Reynolds described what exactly handling the Waitress problem permanently should entail, his tone suggesting discussion of carpet installation rather than orchestrating the elimination of a human being whose existence threatened his carefully constructed empire. Security protocols initiated across all Reynolds properties, accounts, and communications networks, while Marcus selected a fresh shirt from the closet concealed within mahogany paneling, calmly explaining that both problems required resolution within 48 hours before evidence could reach federal authorities, who already harbored suspicions about certain international transactions flagged in their monitoring systems. The cracked vinyl booth at Jimmy's all-night diner caught against the rough fabric of Natalia's uniform as she collected discarded napkins and half-empty coffee mugs from table 8, the fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows that emphasized every smudge on the laminate surfaces and every grease stain on the peeling wallpaper. Sunshine Diner existed in a different universe from Le Ciel, serving truckers and night shift workers, plates piled with eggs and potatoes for $7, including unlimited coffee refills, the tips rarely exceeding $2 per table regardless of service quality. The small white envelope tucked beneath her windshield wiper that morning marked the 3rd this week, each containing the same message composed of letters cut from magazines spelling out her fate should she continue her association with Katerina Reynolds, this one including a photograph of her mother sitting on a bench outside her St. Petersburg apartment building. Across the diner counter, owner Jimmy Kowalski watched her, with eyes that missed nothing, his 62 years etched into a face that had witnessed the darker corners of human behavior during 28 years with NYPD before bullet fragments lodged near his spine had forced early retirement and redirected his energies toward feeding hungry people at prices they could afford. His gravelly voice had caught her after closing 2 nights earlier, casually mentioning his awareness of her situation through old department connections, still monitoring certain financial players in the city, offering both protection and a network of former officers who maintained their own code of justice outside official channels. 17 miles uptown in the Reynolds penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Katerina moved with practiced precision through her morning routine, Accepting the kiss Marcus placed mechanically against her cheek while her eyes revealed nothing of her awareness that divorce papers had already been drawn up, that accounts had been systematically drained of funds legally belonging to her, that her husband had already selected her replacement from eager candidates within his executive team. Her iPhone camera, disguised as a compact mirror, captured images of documents left momentarily unattended on his desk while she poured his preferred breakfast smoothie, her designer heels clicking against Italian marble countertops orchestrated to project casual domestic harmony, while electronic transmissions sent evidence packets to secure servers Katerina had established through intermediaries beyond Marcus's considerable surveillance network. Rain streaked the diner windows as Jimmy installed additional security cameras above entrance points. His former partner from Narcotics Division now stationed in an unmarked vehicle across the street, the humble security measures representing the full extent of protection their limited resources could provide against corporate machinery capable of deploying millions toward problem elimination. Katerina stared at Manhattan spread below her penthouse windows, knowing armed men monitored her every movement, calculating remaining time before Marcus would determine the exact nature of evidence she possessed, her finger tracing invisible patterns on glass, separating her from freedom, while downtown Natalia served greasy spoon specials to customers who would never comprehend how financial crimes in distant boardrooms will shape their shrinking paychecks and rising costs. The neon sign of Sunshine Diner flickered against rain-slicked pavement as Natalia pulled her threadbare coat tighter, the 3M darkness of the alleyway offering no comfort as she headed toward the subway entrance 4 blocks south. The sensation hit her before conscious thought formed, some primitive survival instinct making her duck into the recessed doorway of a closed pawnshop seconds before the black sedan cruised past her intended path, its tinted windows concealing faces, but not intentions, as it circled the block for a second pass. Jimmy appeared like a guardian angel from the shadows of the adjacent building, where he had followed a distance, his weathered hand gripping her elbow as he pulled her through the service entrance of an apartment building where his cousin worked maintenance. His voice urgent but steady as he explained they had 17 minutes before the security cameras would reset and record their presence. The next 72 hours dissolved into a blur of safe houses across 3 boroughs, Jimmy leveraging decades of police connections to create false identity documents, a burner phone and temporary refuge within a network of retired officers who maintained code of silence around operations outside official channels. Across town in the gilded cage of the Reynolds penthouse, Katerina navigated the treacherous waters of pretending nothing had changed, performing the role of trophy wife with Oscar, worthy precision, while armed security personnel maintained constant visual contact, accompanying her even to restroom facilities in upscale restaurants under the guise of protection rather than imprisonment. Their communication channel existed within the comment section of an obscure cooking blog, where encrypted messages hidden behind discussions of sourdough techniques allowed strategic coordination despite physical separation, Katerina uploading financial evidence through specialized steganography software that concealed data within innocent-looking food photographs posted to Instagram accounts established 6 months earlier in anticipation of exactly this contingency. FBI Special Agent Teresa Mendoza received data packets through secure channels established through Jimmy's former partner, assembling the complex puzzle pieces documenting financial crimes spanning 16 countries, while her team worked frantically to verify authentication before seeking warrants against one of the most powerful men in global finance. The walls closed in from all sides as Marcus Reynolds deployed private intelligence assets across the city seeking one missing waitress, his security teams installing additional surveillance equipment in Katerina's closets and bathroom while increasing restrictions on her movements under pretense of elevated threats. Sleep became luxury neither woman could afford as Natalia relocated nightly between safe houses, dyeing her hair black and adopting thick-framed glasses that altered her facial recognition parameters, while Katerina maintained perfect composure during charity galas and board meetings, where she felt the weight of her husband's growing suspicion in every glance. Both women understanding the first-hand evidence contained in their bodies and memories represented the final components needed to destroy an empire built on exploitation and fraud. The golden autumn sunlight filtering through penthouse windows belied the winter that had settled in Katerina's heart as she accidentally glimpsed the flight manifest on Marcus's tablet while serving his morning espresso, private jet arrangements to Dubai scheduled for 72 hours hence, with connecting transportation to a non-disclosure location missing her name entirely. Her manicured fingernails dug crescents into her palms as she maintained her practiced smile, mind racing through implications while calculating access opportunities to the biometric safe in his private office, where physical copies of the Volgograd agreements remained the final evidence needed for federal prosecution. The burner phone vibrated against her thigh 3 hours later in the ladies' room of Bergdorf Goodman, while her security detail waited impatiently outside, the message from Jimmy rather than Natalia sending ice through her veins as she learned her co-conspirator now faced an impossible choice of her own. The St. Petersburg hospital had called with the news that her mother had suffered complete renal failure, requiring immediate dialysis and specialized medication costing $20,000 that Russian healthcare would not cover, the timeline for intervention measured in hours rather than days. The polished marble bathroom stall suddenly felt like a coffin, as Katerina leaned against cool tiles, understanding that her millions in personal accounts had been frozen by Marcus's financial team through legal maneuvers that would take weeks to challenge, leaving her temporarily wealthy on paper, yet unable to access funds that could save one life while she worked to document crimes that had destroyed hundreds. Natalia sat on the fire escape of her latest safe house, autumn wind carrying hints of approaching winter as she stared at the hospital photograph of her mother, suddenly thin and yellow against institutional sheets. The doctor's prognosis clear that without intervention within 36 hours, recovery chances diminished to single-digit percentages. The encrypted communication channel between them, filled with desperate calculations and impossible choices, Katerina unable to access her wealth while possessing freedom to collect evidence, Natalia carrying banking testimony that could secure conviction yet paralyzed by her mother's imminent mortality. Both women facing the identical moral equation of personal sacrifice against justice with different variables yet identical stakes. Agent Mendoza confirmed through secure channels that warrants required 72 hours minimum for judicial approval against someone of Marcus Reynolds' stature without the physical Volgograd documents, exactly 48 hours after his planned departure from American jurisdiction, with billions in laundered assets bound for non-extradition territories. Jimmy offered his police pension as collateral against emergency medical loans, far short of required amounts but representing everything he possessed, while Katerina formulated increasingly desperate infiltration strategies for accessing her husband's private safe during the narrow 15-minute window when security systems required recalibration during weekly maintenance. Both women understanding their parallel timelines now converged toward a single point where separate crises demanded resolution through one coordinated strike against the architect of their collective suffering. The delivery cart rattled against marble floors as Natalia pushed through service entrances of the Reynolds building, clipboard clutched in gloved hands while security cameras tracked her progress through hallways designed to keep service personnel invisible to wealthy residents. Her heart hammered against fake credentials hanging around her neck, face partially obscured beneath the brim of a uniform cap, as she navigated the labyrinth separating working-class infrastructure from luxury condominiums 40 floors above poverty level. Katerina answered the door in silk loungewear worth more than 6 months of Natalia's former rent, her carefully maintained facade cracking momentarily upon recognizing the disguised waitress before recovering her socialite composure for benefit of hallway surveillance, signing for fictional flower arrangements while security personnel maintained discreet distance. The bathroom fan hummed to life, concealing their whispered conversation as Katerina activated signal jammers disguised as cosmetic appliances, creating their only private space in an apartment wired extensively with listening devices monitoring every room. Steam from the running shower enveloped them in protective mist as they finalized what both recognized as their single opportunity for justice, synchronized watches confirming 48 hours until Marcus would escape American jurisdiction forever. FBI credentials passed from Natalia to Katerina confirmed Agent Mendoza had secured strategic positions within Le Ciel for the anniversary dinner Marcus had scheduled as public theatre before his secret departure, surveillance equipment disguised as service staff scheduled to surround their table. The technical components of their trap appeared deceptively simple. A recording device embedded within the diamond pendant Marcus had given Katerina on their first anniversary, requiring her to extract specific confessions regarding Volgograd transactions, without arousing suspicion from a man whose success depended upon paranoid attention to conversational details. Water droplets condensed on marble surfaces around them, like gathering tears as Katerina revealed her strategy for navigating the emotional minefield of manipulating a manipulator. having studied psychological pressure points that might compel Marcus toward revelatory boasting about his financial empire. Their fingers intertwined briefly before separation, one hand bearing calluses from years of service industry labour, meeting another adorned with jewellery that could feed families for generations, different paths converging toward identical purpose. Natalia secured wireless earpieces, allowing Jimmy and federal agents to maintain constant communication throughout operation execution, distributing floor plans, marking security personnel positions, and building exit routes should events require rapid evacuation. Their reflections wavered in steam-covered mirrors as final contingencies were established. Two women born within miles of each other in Volgograd, now standing worlds apart in circumstance, yet united against systems that had stolen fathers, futures, and freedom from both. The delivery cart rolled back towards service elevators 8 minutes later, Natalia vanishing into the invisible workforce that maintained Manhattan luxury, while Katerina resumed performance as contented trophy wife, their separate worlds reuniting only through digital connections and shared determination that Marcus Reynolds would face consequences regardless of the billions insulating him from justice systems designed to protect his kind. The anniversary celebration unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers at Le Ciel, 20 tables occupied by financial royalty, while Marcus and Katerina Reynolds held court beneath the central dome where champagne flutes caught light like liquid diamonds. Every surface gleamed with calculated opulence, from hand-polished silverware to imported flowers costing more than monthly rent in most Manhattan apartments, the perfect stage for the performance reaching its dangerous climax after months of preparation. Katerina navigated the conversational minefield with practiced precision, her questions about their early days together seeming like sentimental anniversary nostalgia, while strategically steering toward the Volgograd acquisitions, the diamond pendant at her throat containing technology capable of documenting whatever admissions she might extract from her husband. The subtle shift in Marcus registered first in his eyes, the predatory calculation replacing artificial warmth as his fingers tensed around his champagne stem, security personnel stationed at strategic locations throughout the restaurant, adjusting positions in response to imperceptible signals. Agent Mendoza positioned 3 operatives disguised as waitstaff within coverage radius, while Jimmy monitored security feeds from the surveillance van parked outside, all eyes tracking the dangerous dance between husband and wife as Katerina pressed further into forbidden territory. The moment crystallized when Marcus reached across the table, his fingers brushing against the pendant at her throat with sudden interest rather than affection, his Harvard-educated mind connecting suspicious questions with unusual jewelry choices, understanding blooming across features suddenly cold with recognition. Champagne cascaded across imported tablecloth as Natalia appeared from seemingly nowhere, tray tilting at precisely calculated angle to send expensive bubbles streaming across Marcus Reynolds' custom-tailored jacket sleeve while leaving electronic equipment safely dry, profuse apologies flowing as she dabbed ineffectually at the spreading stain. The practice choreography created 17 seconds of perfect chaos, Marcus distracted by genuine rage at the interruption of his privileged evening, security personnel momentarily confused by the disruption while Katerina accessed his unlocked phone abandoned beside his plate during the commotion. Her fingers moved with surgeon precision, navigating to security settings where retinal scanning revealed the master password sequence reflected in the polished silver bread knife beside his plate, the code vanishing into her perfect memory before replacing the device exactly 2 centimeters from his water glass. The restaurant atmosphere crystallized with dangerous tension as Natalia retreated toward kitchen doors. Marcus straightened his soaked sleeve with murderous composure, and Katerina resumed her performance with fractionally elevated pulse rate, all players now positioned for the endgame about to explode across their carefully constructed battlefield. FBI agents communicated through encrypted channels as facial recognition software confirmed the presence of 7 known Reynolds security operatives strategically positioned around the dining room, while Jimmy relayed intelligence regarding additional personnel stationed outside. The elegant restaurant transformed into an invisible chessboard, where justice and corruption prepared for final confrontation with billions of dollars and multiple lives hanging in perfect balance. The first signal came as champagne flutes clinked for anniversary toasts, Agent Mendoza rising from her position at table 3 while simultaneously removing her FBI credentials from beneath her evening gown. The movement echoed across 12 strategic locations throughout Le Ciel, as federal agents shed civilian disguises with choreographed precision. Marcus registered the threat with animal instinct, abandoning dignified pretense as he overturned the anniversary table with explosive force, crystal and china shattering across imported marble flooring while he lunged towards secondary exits with security personnel moving to intercept federal officers. His escape calculations failed to account for Natalia, who emerged from service corridors to block the kitchen pathway. Her stance transformed from subservient to resolute, as years of carrying heavy trays had built strength belied by her slender frame. The electronic systems, normally displaying wine selections and daily specials throughout the restaurant, suddenly flickered and changed as Katerina executed the final command sequence on her husband's phone, redirecting display protocols to project damning evidence across every visible surface of the establishment where financial elites now froze between bites of Wagyu beef and truffle risotto. Banking records cascaded across walls in devastating clarity. Wire transfer confirmations linking Reynolds International directly to shell companies in Volgograd, Moscow, and 16 other jurisdictions where laundered funds had destroyed lives and corrupted institutions while building his $11 billion empire on foundations of human suffering. Marcus lunged toward Natalia with murderous intent only to find Jimmy and two former NYPD officers materializing between predator and prey, decades of street justice experience evident in their protective formation around the waitress who had risked everything to stand in this moment of truth. The restaurant ceiling exploded with light as additional federal teams breached from concealed positions, tactical gear contrasting against fine dining surroundings, while handcuffs gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless celebrations of wealth without questioning its origins. Across electronic displays throughout the restaurant, Reynolds International stock plummeted in real time as trading algorithms registered the FBI raid occurring simultaneously at corporate headquarters, automated selling protocols triggering cascading failures across interconnected markets dependent upon fraudulent valuation models. Katerina stood resplendent in righteous fury as she narrated the evidence for stunned onlookers and recording devices, her voice carrying the weight of every victim from Volgograd to Manhattan, while Marcus Reynolds found himself physically restrained in the same space where he had once commanded obsequious service without acknowledging the humanity of those who provided it. The final image, burning itself into collective memory, featured Natalia stepping forward from shadows into spotlight, no longer invisible to the wealthy patrons who had never seen beyond her uniform. Her voice steady as she formally identified Marcus Reynolds as the architect of financial crimes that had driven her father to suicide 12 years earlier in a Russian winter far removed from Manhattan opulence. Morning sunlight streamed through windows unmarred by Caracks or tape at Café Volgograd, warming the reclaimed wood tables where neighborhood residents lingered over coffee, served in handmade ceramic mugs fired by local artists rather than mass-produced porcelain. 6 months had transformed the abandoned corner storefront into a gathering place where baristas earned living wages plus benefits, where pastries emerged from ovens tended by former homeless individuals completing culinary training programs, where every detail reflected Natalia Petrova's vision of what business could be when profit served people rather than extracting from them. The walls featured rotating exhibitions from emerging artists who shared cultural roots with immigrant communities throughout the neighborhood, while bookshelves offered multilingual selections that children browsed freely during weekend story hours, hosted by volunteer grandmothers who transmitted cultural heritage through tales from their homelands. Financial backing had materialized through the Volgograd Restoration Foundation, established with $30 million from Katerina Reynolds' personal fortune unfrozen after federal investigations confirmed her whistleblower status, its mission providing both compensation for fraud victims and investment capital for survivor-owned businesses, creating sustainable community wealth rather than concentrated shareholder value. Across 8 time zones in St. Petersburg, Natalia Mother attended her weekly dialysis treatment in a private medical facility where cutting-edge treatments had reversed the worst of her condition, the treatment team remaining quietly unaware that her primary benefactor had once been married to the financial criminal who had indirectly caused her illness by destroying her husband and community. Livestream coverage of United States v. Reynolds appeared occasionally on the cafe tablet when major developments warranted attention, federal prosecutors methodically dismantling legal defenses while Marcus' attorney teams shrunk proportionally with his frozen assets, justice grinding forward with institutional patience while everyday people rebuilt lives in his destructive wake. The worn couch beneath windows welcomed elderly residents who remembered when their neighborhood had been redlined by banks following practices similar to those Marcus had perfected through technological sophistication, their wisdom informing monthly financial literacy workshops conducted in 7 languages for community members navigating systems designed to confuse and extract rather than serve. Natalia moved through her creation with unhurried purpose, remembering carrying leaden trays beneath chandeliers where wealth insulated itself from consequences, the contrast between performative luxury and authentic community visible in every detail from mismatched coffee mugs to the pay what you can afford shelf of essential groceries available to anyone facing food insecurity regardless of documentation status. The aroma of fresh bread and brewing coffee replaced industrial cleaning chemicals and expensive perfumes, while genuine conversation supplanted performative networking, creating space where Katerina could visit wearing jeans and sweaters rather than designer armor, where both women experienced the freedom of purpose unconstrained by systems that had nearly destroyed them both. The morning rush at Café Volgograd brought its usual symphony of steaming milk and conversation when the suited executive barged through the door, phone pressed to ear while barking orders to someone evidently beneath his station. His free hand slapped premium credit card onto counter without eye contact or pause in his conversation, finger jabbing toward menu board in silent command while treating Natalia as merely an extension of the coffee equipment. 22 seconds passed before he lowered his device momentarily, irritation flashing across features as he demanded immediate service despite 3 customers ahead in queue, voice carrying practiced authority accustomed to compliance without question. Memories flickered briefly behind Natalia's eyes, echoes of Claude berating her for imagined deficiencies at Le Ciel, of silent submission purchased through financial desperation, replaced instantly by calm certainty as she met his impatient gaze with steady resolve. Her voice carried neither apology nor aggression as she gestured to waiting customers, explaining their cafe honored the dignity of every person regardless of status or wealth, inviting him to either join their community respectfully or find service elsewhere. The television mounted near community bulletin boards shifted to breaking news as federal prosecutors announced additional indictments against 6 banking executives connected to Reynolds International, footage showing Marcus being escorted between court appearances in standard-issue clothing rather than bespoke suits. The anchor referenced the growing phenomenon of corporate whistleblowers emerging across financial sectors, directly citing the inspiration of what media had dubbed the Russian Waitress revelation that had collapsed an $11 billion empire built on exploitation and fraud. Sunlight caught the simple pendant hanging at Natalia's throat, a tiny silver key Katerina had given her, representing doors unlocked between their disparate worlds. Freedom found through truth rather than capital accumulation. The executive stood momentarily frozen between entitlement and reconsideration, watching as Natalia welcomed elderly Ukrainian customers with warmth transcending transactional service, before wordlessly returning his card to leather wallet and selecting empty chair among diverse patrons whose conversations bridged cultural divides his professional world rarely acknowledged. Behind counter glass, photographs told silent stories of transformation, from grand opening attended by community members regardless of socioeconomic status, to Katerina and Natalia breaking ground on affordable housing, funded through recovered fraud proceeds, to her mother standing healthy beside St. Petersburg hospital staff who had saved her life. The weight that had once pressed Natalia's shoulders into permanent curve had lifted through justice rather than submission, through courage that recognized systems could be changed rather than merely endured, her cafe standing as a living testament that ordinary individuals acting from moral conviction could create ripples transforming into waves powerful enough to reshape landscapes previously thought immutable by design, her simple refusal to remain invisible ultimately illuminating paths toward justice for countless others as still finding their voices.